um amigo que foi preso pela polícia. Eles levou ele dentro de um quarto e encostou livro de telefone no corpo dele. Eles bateram nele. Aí quando ele perguntou por quê, eles falaram que era porque ele era preto. Agora, eu sei que ele fica na rua, é troço assim, mas eu não pode ver porque eles podem fazer um troço com uma criança. Eu sei que no Brasil eles matam um monte de criança todo dia só porque ele está na rua.
Five-finger discounting, backyard shopping from backyard, stealing. It's mainly the guys who do it. A lot of guys probably do it for amusement. It's something to do during the night, been an adrenaline rush. But you get the desperados who need money for drugs. You know, they do it because they have to do it. Everyone's into drugs. Ease, ecstasy and acid.
Do girls get into crime?
Oh, some do.
In many cultures and in many historical periods, the ages from 15 to 18, you could practically say, are the crime wave years. And I suppose anyone who's had adolescent kids or knows much about adolescence is not really that surprised by that. That's when kids are testing the limits and acting out and finding themselves and trying to assert themselves.
The rich people are sitting ducks for our stealing. Because the look of the houses just says we have more money than other people, so you steal from their house because there's plenty and it knock them down a peg or two.
Well, it starts from the belief that what we've learned in criminology hasn't got us very far in understanding why some societies have higher crime rates than others. Traditionally, we would look at deterrence explanations of that societies that have lower crime rates are societies that have more efficient police forces that are more effective in locking up wrongdoers. But the evidence now is not supportive of that. It just simply is not the case that the societies with low crime rates are the societies that are more efficient at locking people up.
Of course, there's a lot of crime that's not detected, and there's a lot of crime that doesn't happen unless it's detected. And there's a lot of young people are charged with offences relating to like abusing police or offensive language and those sorts of things. Now, most of those sorts of offences only happen when there are police officers around, and they tend to happen more if the police are more ostentatious in their way of policing, if they're more provocative, and so on.
One of the things you've really got to ask yourself, whether you're a police officer or a juvenile justice worker or whatever, is what do you hope to achieve by being involved in processing of juvenile offenders? And what hopefully all workers would say is the best possible outcome. And when we talk about best possible outcome, we talk about how can we assist that young individual make a constructive contribution to the community and the society in which he or she lives.
We spoke to young people, both who had and hadn't been in trouble with the law, to police officers, to lawyers, to fax personnel, and to families and community organisations. We found that there were very strong social bases to the crime patterns that we saw, that young people who were most likely to get involved, or, you know, on a sort of broad social demographic scale, the kids who are most likely to get into trouble were the kids who were least likely to have jobs and least likely to have educational opportunities.
Everyone's just going back to school and that because they can't find any jobs around or no apprenticeships going, so they're probably just going to go back to school, or if not, they'll probably just leave school and do nothing.
There's very little there for the youth, exactly. It's just mainly what needs just places to go when there's nothing really to do.
We usually have like black licensed drivers and that, but there's not many around, or we usually have to hitch all the way into town just for something little, then hitch all the way back out. It takes all day just for one little thing, when if we had some transportation to be in and back before you know it.
Transport's important too, of course. And that's the sort of problem that you get in some dispersed country areas where people are living far away from TAFE, from jobs and so on. They then totally reliant on cars or motorcycles or something. And, if they don't have that, they can't get work.
The high rate of crime and all the rest of it, you know, the acts of vandalism and everything else that are around, are only due to the fact that the kids are bored. So what we tried to do was establish a youth group. The concept was that if we had a youth group and we had activities, the kids would fall into those activities, and rather than finding trouble for themselves, would find themselves doing something a little bit worthwhile.
We need something to keep people occupied all the time.
Well, so what are some of the things that happen out of this frustration? Vandalism and just hanging around
we keep getting hanging around up the shops at night and that. We're getting into trouble for that because they reckon we're, what do they call it, loitering or something?
Loitering, it's mainly petty things that they keep getting in trouble for. There's loitering.
Even if you're not doing nothing wrong, the police will come up and say, you know, get out or I'll defect your car.
Well, they'll ask you to see whether you've got any money. If you haven't got any money on you, you're not meant to be up there either or something. You're meant to have money on you. Stupid things they get you for. So just try to kick you out.
Tia tako ana i Australia, e tuku karo e akawa, e ke atu. E te tamariki mea, e kara kirikiri, ko manu ko rotu, tamariti. Karo te peka peka, ko e tamati kino. Ko e mau kotu tangatu, kare atu akawa, e ke mā i a mau. I tuku manuku, ko e te ao kara akawa, karotutu rotu ai te ao. Tamariki no atu me e makita me e kerekere.
How many of these kids that are pulled up in front of the magistrate really should be there? I mean, you know, was what they did so bad, or was what they did unable to be dealt with another way? And is it just part and parcel of this whole issue of Aboriginal police relations, Aboriginal incarceration, that it's just, oh, well, they're black, so, you know, they've probably done something before, so let's just throw them in front of the court and that's the end of it. I mean, that is not the way to deal with the issues. That is not the way to resolve the situation of Aboriginal incarceration and the high incidence of it, because ultimately many of these kids that are in juvenile detention centres now are going to end up, whether we like it or not, in jails, where they're putting so much effort and so much emphasis on what's happening to Aboriginal prisoners because of deaths in custody.
The traditional criminal process is a process that very often makes things worse as a result of processes of labelling or stigmatisation. So what the theory in crime, shame and reintegration about is making a distinction between two types of shaming. Stigmatisation, which is a form of shaming that has negative consequences in terms of delinquency and in terms of the future of the young person, and reintegrative shaming, which is a form of shaming that holds the young person accountable, that doesn't walk away from the fact that some rather terrible act of violence or property offending has occurred, and this is something that we take seriously as a community, that we're not going to sweep under the carpet, but on the other hand does so in a way that doesn't cast the young person out. It, if you like, focuses on the evil of the deed rather than the evil of the person.
And I think it's very important that we look at juvenile crime as mistakes rather than out-and-out malicious behaviour against society. If a person's punished or reprimanded in a correct way, they'll act accordingly. If they are overly punished, then they will tend to hit back and have a resentment, and then that's going to create problems later on in life for them.
We think it's fairly unreasonable to expect teenagers to behave in certain ways if they don't have full access to accurate information. And I think that's a mistake that, in particular, my generation has made with kids. We hide information from them. We demonstrate levels of dishonesty with them, and those sort of things breed tremendous resentment in young people, particularly when they finally gain access to that information.
And what really is urgently needed is a combined effort by federal and state governments and by departments that affect the lives of these children when they're in those centres and the lives when they get out, of being able to say, well, there is going to be a support service for these young people that will be able to direct them into TAFE or direct them into the sorts of areas that might give them the opportunity or would give them the opportunity of not ending up back in those centres.
You get all the try-hard homeboys and try to adopt the American image, and that's from all the movies that they're releasing. Rolling people and stuff and bash people up just for a pair of shoes. Where I come from, no one cares about breaking in so much, you know. They get a mischievous crime like, oh, I don't know, bending down parking signs and smashing letterboxes and just jumping over fences and steal people's clothes and vandalism.
And the answers in particularly dealing with juvenile crime is not about bureaucrats, it's not about governments, it's not about legislation, it's really about community involvement, because essentially what we're talking about are community offences, often very low-level crime, committed by offenders, juvenile offenders, within the local community against community people. And the key to our approach is really to try and deal with those offenders in the community context.
The Minister has made his position clear on the subject of juvenile crime, that the court should be involved in processing of offenders because the dispensation of justice remains with the courts, not with police or lawyers. He believes there is a deterrent value in putting offenders before the courts before they are diverted to a community aid panel program. Community aid panels consist of a local police officer.
There was an American sociological article many years ago called Conditions, about courts, called Conditions for Successful Degradation Ceremonies. And they saw the court as being consciously a degradation ceremony to degrade the person. Now, I think that's counterproductive, because young people who are trying to grow up, trying to assert that they've got some rights to dignity in the world, who are trying to prove their identity, I really think, and the more I've talked to them, the more I think this is true, that the more you degrade them, the more they're going to lash out and fight back.
Once we start treating kids as if they're bad, treating kids as if they're junkies, they're more likely to adopt a self-conception, an identity as a junkie or as a criminal of one sort or another, and that's the problem. And institutions for juvenile offenders, for example, are universities for crime, in a sense, are institutions that make things worse.
Well, when I got out of Penang, I had to go back to court on the second day I was out, and they gave me a year's curfew at 4 o'clock to be inside. And if I was to be picked up after 4 o'clock, even if it was a minute after 4 o'clock, I would cop a $40 fine. And if that happened 3 times, I would have been back in Penang. Well, most jobs you find nowadays, you work till 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. It's a bit hard, you know, to go to work and get off at 4 o'clock and the cops are sitting there waiting for you and say, look, it's a minute after 4. It's another $40 fine. So, stuff that. I'm not living a 4 o'clock curfew all my life. And I went to Adelaide and started again. I moved in with my dad and I found a job. and everything was going great until my mother died.
Well, we're already spending a lot, or paying a lot, for juvenile crime. The crimes that kids commit costs money. Locking them up in detention centres costs an enormous amount of money. It costs about $60,000 a year. It costs very much less than that to supervise a kid in the community. We're spending an enormous amount on policing, which is, to a large extent, policing young people. We could, I think, turn around our type of approach to juvenile crime without necessarily even increasing the overall budget. We've got to look at our priorities, whether we want to lock them up and flog them, or whether we want to give them opportunities to get out of a life of crime and grow up successfully.
Police generally have got little or no confidence in the court system. They feel that the offender basically gets off scot-free. They feel that the offender's parents aren't interested. They feel that the community picks up the tab, but more importantly, they feel the victim receives no recognition, involvement, and essentially have no rights. So it was on that basis that we felt, as a patrol, that things could be done differently and we could be more effective if we sat down and tried to discover how we could make our intervention more effective. And out of that evolved this family process, which in essence brings together all of those people directly involved or affected by a particular crime.
My boy was playing with his sister, who's a year younger, in the playground just over the road from our house. And the other two boys came along and decided to stir them up. And it was purely stirring to start with, and they took their tennis ball.
There was me and a friend. We went to the school ground and these kids were mucking around. And my friend said, let's chase them. And we got their tennis ball and the kid asked for it back.
They didn't want to give the ball back, and so they got a garbage bin and emptied it and rammed it down on his head. And in that actual ramming it on his head, they caused concussion.
And my friend stuck a garbage bin on the kid's head and told me to hit it with a baseball bat. And I did, and then the kid threw the bin off, and my friend pulled out 2 knives.
My daughter came home screaming. She was really petrified, but the effects of the concussion had caused my son to come home vague and odd. Oh, no big deal, Mum. But that night he couldn't stop vomiting and he had the worst headache he's ever had. I was concerned because of the concussion that there could be further medical problems, and had I not done the official thing, we might not have any kind of comeback.
The forum we provide is the first opportunity that they've had to, in fact, explain and share with all of those exactly what is meant to them. Now, we go through that process. The parents and others are invited to comment. And interesting, the parents often talk about the shame that they experience and the difficulty in dealing with a young person in the family who wants to commit these sorts of offences.
I've been to court myself as an offender, and I've been on jury duty. Instead of going to court, being humiliated at court, Sergeant O'Connell, he seems to be having things coming up face to face and talk to them. It's a much better system.
So one of the very good things that happens in the Wagga process, and I've seen Sergeant Terry O'Connell do this at the end of a conference where the victim family had been traumatised by a violent offence and were afraid that they would be victimised by these 2 young offenders again. Asked the victim, the 2 victims, 2 young victims and their family to stay back after the conference, and it said to them, the police sergeant saying to them, now do you feel confident that this is not going to happen again? Are you assured, as a result of the discussion that's occurred with the offenders here today, that they're not going to come after your children again?
One of the real benefits of of the conference was that it completed it for him. It made an end to it. Up until that point, they were quite concerned about seeing these boys in the street, or concerned that there would be, our house would get broken into, or concerned that there would be some sort of retaliation for for the children coming to me and me going to the police. But actually in the conference was really good because they saw those boys as frightened boys too.
What we've got to focus on is conditions for successful reintegration ceremonies, and what those conditions are include having support from people who the young person cares about, having expressions of the intrinsic worthiness of the young person, so that in the midst of all of the bringing out of the terrible consequences of the offence, there's repair work goes in to saying, look, we believe in you, we have a soft spot for you, we love you, we believe.
Are we process workers? Or alternatively, are we in an ideal position as gatekeepers of the juvenile justice, criminal justice system, of making a very worthwhile contribution? And through early intervention, using a process which involves families, victims, you're able to set the scene for something which hopefully will have a better outcome for all involved.
And that's what politicians have got to be brought to understand, that their crude political analysis that says that you respond to the needs of victims and get on side with victims by getting tougher and tougher and tougher in the criminal justice system actually does not solve your political problem. Here is a way that you can solve your political problem by giving victims direct power in the particular matter that affected their lives.
The value of what we're doing is about dealing with the offending behaviour. And when you look at juveniles and juvenile crime, I think it saddens me to think that I run into people who are 40 and 50 years of age who carry this legacy of being busted at 15 or 16 for breaking into offence, and they've got this legacy for the rest of their life.
If you take any one person, the experiences they have affect their behaviours. Now, if we have a young person who is offending, you can't say straight out it's the parent's fault or it's this fault or that fault. You've got to look in at all the factors that involve this child. But basically, the child has been brought up not only by the parents but by that community. By having that community as part of an integrated punishment, say, for the child, then the child's going to have a learning experience, and hopefully then the antisocial behaviours will stop. But if you take that child away from that community, the learning experience becomes very bad, and it is not fulfilling any objective other than punishing the child.